Good evening. Good evening and welcome to Concordia University. I'm Johnny Dreesner. I serve as interim president at Concordia, and it is indeed an honor and a privilege to have you all here. It is an exciting opportunity for us to host Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon's Collins Summit again this year. It's been a great experience so far, and we hope it lasts a long time. Thank you for being here to dialogue about the critical social and religious issues centered on human migration. I want to begin by saying that we stand in solidarity with all people of faith and indeed with all reasonable people as we mourn especially as we mourn the tragedy of the events at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, and for all those suffering from violence and injustice around the world. Concordia University shares EMO's commitment to bringing together diverse communities, including communities of faith, to explore critical issues related to religion and social ethics. At the university, we believe that education is a critical pathway to opportunity and impact, and as such, fulfilling the potential of every person. We seek to participate as models of giving back as global citizens, advancing peace and valuing all humanity and creation as gifts of a loving God. Concordia is not only the largest private university in Oregon, we're also among the most diverse. We're proud to have students, graduates, and families who have migrated to the United States from around the world, many of whom are part of the first generation of their family who have attended college. In fact, 30% of Concordia's students are first-generation college students. In this very space, thank you. In this very space, last spring, our student graduation speaker, Pauline, shared her family's story of being forced to leave Rwanda during the genocide and civil war. They left everything they had behind. Pauline went on to earn a bachelor's degree from Concordia, and we are blessed to have her on staff here at Concordia. We stand with you and we embrace the dialogue with you. Thank you for being here, and God's blessings.
Good evening. I am Jan Elfers, the president of Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, and it is a pleasure to see you all here tonight. Welcome to our 2018 Collins Lecture, Human Migration, Claiming Roots in an Uprooted World. This was an easy call for us. It is obviously a very timely issue in this day, but resettling refugees is in our very DNA. We've been resettling refugees since the 70s. We've been offering legal services to immigrants and refugees for decades. We have programs that are, our clients are primarily refugees and immigrants. We have a food house. We have a program for Russian-speaking citizens who are victims of sexual assault and domestic violence. So this topic is very personal to us and to our staff and to our clients. So we come tonight together, and I'd like to first of all thank Concordia University for hosting us. They've been great to work with, and we're really grateful to them. I'd also like to give our heartfelt thanks to the Collins Foundation, who since 1967 has been funding this and enabling us to present topics of interest, topics of importance to our community. And I'd like to thank Truman Collins, who I believe is here tonight. Special thanks to him. There he is. Thanks, Truman. Thank you for coming. And if you look on your program, you'll see the other co-sponsors that have graciously offered their time and their money and their energy towards this. We're also streaming in Eugene, so we have a live stream right now going, and we've got several churches in Eugene that will be watching this tonight. This has been a particularly tragic week of violence in our country. The massacre of 11 Jewish worshipers in Pittsburgh. In Kentucky, the murder of 2 African Americans killed by a white supremacist who first tried to enter a black church. Pipe bombs sent through the mail to terrorize politicians and the media. We know that nationwide and in our own state of Oregon, the numbers of hate crimes has increased exponentially. We lament the rapid deterioration of respectful dialogue in public discourse in our country and the demonization of those whom are deemed as the other. It is unconscionable to allow the United States to continue to be a place where violence is accepted as the norm and where exclusion and hate are nurtured. Tonight, we stand side by side with our friends and neighbors who are being threatened. With record numbers of people migrating and xenophobia on the rise, it is imperative that we humanize one another and defend and protect the most vulnerable in our communities. Our safety is bound up in the safety of those around us. It is up to us and to all Americans of goodwill to counteract these troubling trends in America by speaking out and by acting together to restore our shared values, the human dignity of every person, and our commitment to the common good. We must not let the enormity of our grief daunt us from doing all we can to confront hate with love, for only love can break the barriers that divide us. In the midst of these difficult times, remember that darkness and hope are not opposites. Darkness is often the very context in which hope is found. We have just experienced an incredible day of hope, learning about our refugee and immigrant neighbors through story, music, poetry, and public witness. We are privileged to welcome our speakers tonight to continue this very important discussion. And now, I would like to introduce the Reverend J.W. Matt Hennessy, Board Chair of Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon and the Senior Pastor at Vancouver Avenue First Baptist Church.
Good evening, everybody. Oh, come on now. You know, I've already heard this morning that, you know, you sure made us Lutherans clap a lot. So I'm just asking you to be Baptist for like 5 minutes. That's it. Thank you so much, Jan, and thank you, Concordia. Thank you to each one of you for being here this evening. This is special to us, and one of the reasons why I wanted to go get Brother Truman and his friend is because it is so important to us that you know how much your mother, how much you're the foundation, and we're looking forward to getting to know you more, what you mean to help make this happen. And we want to say thank you. Let's do that again, would you please? Thank you so much. I really mean that. Thank you so very much. On my personal behalf, on behalf of Elder Allen and the board of Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon and the staff and the great historic church that I have been blessed to lead for the last 14 years. It is a joy to be here tonight with you and to have been with you this afternoon in the welcome program as well as in the breakout session. So I got a chance to be in two, and both were absolutely astounding, and I was really, really happy to be a part of that. I would like, before I do the opening prayer, this is me being Baptist again, so y'all hang with me for a minute. I'd like all the board members of EMO to please stand, and retired board members as well, so we can do that and really thank them for all of their work. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You've met our amazing staff, and I mean we have an amazing staff when you came in. If there are staff members who are here in the building, in the auditorium right now, if you'll stand. Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon staff, thank you so much. Again, we are deeply indebted to you for the great work that you do, and we thank you because we know for this to come together, it happens because of some amazing people working behind the scenes to do it. Now, Sandy Page has a boyfriend. Y'all may have never met him before, but he's special to all of us, and that's Reverend Dr. Rodney Page. And I'd like to just ask you once again, darn, I'm doing it again, aren't I? You Lutherans are having a problem with me right now. Here we go, clapping a lot. Do me a favor, Rodney is not only our retired executive director, former executive director, but also on the board now. He and Sandy are a pair. Stand up, Sandy. Thank you both. Thank you both for your great work and your great vision, and we're carrying on the work that you started a long time ago, and to us it's an honor, really a humbling honor to be able to do that. Tonight, before I do the prayer, I just want to remind you that you have on your seats an envelope, and that envelope is very important to us as we continue to offer the Collins Lecture. We are in partnership with Collins, and they have given us a challenge to raise a certain amount of money between November the 1st and December the 1st, and we want your help to help us meet that challenge. Tonight, I won't go into full detail, but I'm just going to tell you right now, whatever you've got, give it. Doesn't that sound like a good, that's good Baptist, is that right? There you go. Whatever you've got, give it, and if you have not given till it hurts, you haven't given enough. But I would ask you to sincerely do that. And let me tell you what also happens with that. Most of you know that Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon is one of the strongest ecumenical ministry, literally, that's not just me saying that, it is in the entire United States. And we are proud of the great work that's been done over the years, and certainly our great executive directors and now our president, Jan. But by giving tonight, you're partnering with us. You're providing legal aid to immigrants seeking legal status or fighting deportation. You're assisting us with resettlement of refugees. You are helping refugee children adjust in local schools. By giving tonight, you are providing medical aid and mental health assistance to refugees. You are helping immigrants traumatized by domestic violence or sexual violence. You are providing emergency food and clothing to those who are displaced. Your help tonight helps us with housing the unaccompanied immigrant students so they can finish high school, offering resources to immigrants living with HIV, advocating for migrant concerns at the state and the local levels, and helping us engage and educate others so that they too can address the concerns of refugees and immigrants. By giving tonight, what you give beyond what you have given in the recent past will be matched dollar for dollar through a generous offer by the Collins Foundation. The best investment you can make today, double your money. And so I just want to thank you. I want to hear a cheer or something about, can't you give us that right now? There you go. There you go. We will all do our part, and we are grateful for you doing your part. And I really I hope that you hear the sincerity in my voice and in my heart for asking you to help us do that. Now, I'm going to do something that is not Baptist, but I'm going to ask you to stand, everybody who's able. And I'm going to ask you to turn to your neighbor and give them their hand, arm, or shoulder, and just say good evening to them, especially those you haven't had a chance to say that to. Very good. All right, if you'll remain standing. What's that? That's it. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. If you'll remain standing. How many of you in this room know Wajdi Saeed? Yeah, a lot, right? So Wajdi came up to me right now and he said, listen, go ask 20 people to give you $1,000 right now. If you've never been to his fundraiser before, they raised $250,000 in a matter of moments. Come on, y'all. I mean, that's beautiful for the Muslim Educational Trust. It's a beautiful thing. But see, Wajdi can do that. As a preacher, people give us a hard time reaching out for money. You know that. But I do want you to know that if you have that, whatever you have, please give it tonight, all right? So as you stand, get your neighbor's hand, arm, or shoulder, and this will be the prayer. And then our chair-elect, the Reverend Linda Hamarillo, will come up, and she will share the next phase of our program. Eternal Spirit, we thank you for Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon. We thank you for its past, its present, and its future. We thank you for the theme of what brings us here tonight, because we are your people. We believe that you have called us for such a time as this. We come together as your people, defending who America is. And what a joy it is to be able to say that this is the land of the free, it is the home of the brave, and it is the place where we know that those that are seeking refuge and asylum, that this and these shores are theirs as they have been for many years in the past. We pray a blessing on everything that has been done so far in this beautiful day, and we thank you for the action steps that we will take as we leave this place. But as we do so, we pray a blessing over the conversation that our speakers will have today, and we pray that we will leave with a resolve that we will be united and not divided, that we will say yes to love and not to hate, and that we will do our part to be the people that you want us to be. May all that we do be to your glory, and we say together, amen, amen, amen. Amen. Let's have a big, hearty clap of praise.
Good evening, friends. It is good to see you. It is good to see you. I want to add my deep gratitude for all who have supported this year's Collins Summit, this afternoon and this evening, as we have prepared by hearing words of story, songs of story, poetry of story, as we participated, as we delved deeper into the areas that really are addressing this incredibly critical topic. And we proclaimed on the streets just an hour ago in light that we oppose Measure 105. This evening, as you've heard, and I will have a more formal invitation and presentation of our speakers this evening, but we have a special opportunity to hear the Reverend Dr. David Vásquez-Levy, the president of Pacific School of Religion, my alma mater. I'm very proud. And Ellen Rosenblum, our Attorney General of the state of Oregon. It is such an honor to have them both here. This evening, at the end of their presentations, we will have an opportunity to ask questions. They will welcome that. So when you came in and on your seats, you probably found a card like this. And if you wondered what it was, here it is. If you have a question that you would like to present to them, please fill it out and let us know who you would like it directed to, and pass it down to the outside aisles, if you would, and our staff team will pick them up and we'll sort through them. We won't be able to answer all your questions, I'm sure, but we will be working with the staff team to get themes and put them up there so that we can get some of the questions answered, because we'll have that time today. Now, I want to just share with you a story. I'm a bridge fan. Somebody has always heard me say that. I love bridges, literal and figurative. But there is this bridge that spans the Rio Grande River, El Rio Grande. On one bank is Ciudad Juárez, in the state of Chihuahua, Mexico. On the other bank is El Paso, in the state of Texas, United States of America. Interestingly, this bridge is called by many names, like Puente Rio Bravo, the Stanton Street Bridge, and more ironically, is officially known as either the Good Neighbor, International Bridge, or Friendship Bridge. Flowing below is the Rio Grande River. Not only an historic landmark for many of us, it's more practically an essential source of water for both cities and many others on its path. So when you go to Mexico and they tell you not to drink the water, El Pasoans know that they're drinking the same water. Now, the flow of the Rio Grande River has been altered in the last several years. On my last visit there, I was stunned to see the river has been redirected by a concrete viaduct that is bordered with a tall chain link fence that is rolled barbed wire dressing the top of its structures. You see, what had happened was that the natural flow of the Rio Grande River was moving and threatening the demarcation line between Mexico and the United States, between these two cities that have been internationally connected. A few feet of U.S. soil was becoming Mexico. So, Ciudad Juárez and El Paso were virtually one community many years ago. People on both sides migrated across these bridges daily to go to work, to do their shopping, to visit with friends and family, to enjoy recreation, and to attend worship. Their migration story was very normal, just as ours has been for centuries. When we think back about our own stories, we have to think back centuries to the biblical ancestors, the migration of Abraham and Sarah, and Moses and Miriam, and Joshua and Jacob, of Ruth and Noemi, of Muhammad, of Joseph and Mary and Jesus. Some migrated by choice, but others by force. We also have our own story of migration, of our biological ancestors. We can name them. Our migration of our grandmothers and our grandfathers and our aunts and our uncles. The migration of Joseph and Isabel and Lek and Charles and Tran and Obadiah and Rebecca. Some have migrated by choice and others by force. Really, we're not that much different than our ancestors. Migration from one place to another is not new, and the reasons to move around this world and environment has not changed. But you see, friends, our connection is real. This connection made real through our kinship, that we all know that we are made in the image of the divine, and this means all, not just some. Tonight we share this space as people of many faiths and people of goodwill who can drink from the same flowing water. People who come together to form a bridge, a friendship bridge, that we so desperately need in our times. And now it is my distinct honor to introduce this evening's guide and moderator, Sumaya Hassan Elmi, who will introduce our esteemed keynote speakers. Sumaya is from Somalia, East Africa, grew up in Pakistan. She moved to the United States and has lived in Oregon for 19 years. She's a community health worker by training and profession. However, because of her desire to be of help to her community, Sumaya is now the program manager for the Somali American Council of Oregon, a job she loves. Help me welcome Sumaya Hassan Elmi.
Good evening. Welcome. I'm honored to introduce our two guest speakers tonight. David Vásquez-Levy served as the president of Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, California, preceding multi-nomination seminars, Center of Social Justice, and prepared spiritually roots leader of building the world where all we can drift, committed pastor, nation recognition of immigration leader, and speaker, international faith, higher education, and social change. And the second one, Ellen Rosenblum is the general formal, attorney, judge of the first elected for 4 years as Oregon 17th Attorney General, November 12th, re-elected as second term, November 8th, 2016. She is the first woman to serve as Oregon attorney, as persecuted in formal protection, civil rights, and advocates. Thank you, and help me welcome David Vásquez.
Let me add my words of gratitude for your presence with us here, and a welcome to this conversation. And thank you, Sumaya, for your gracious introduction. Lots of folks to thank for tonight, and those have been expressed already, but I do want to reemphasize my gratitude to EMO for hosting this conversation. As we began to think about a theme for this discussion, it was important that we have it, and it was clear at the time. We could not have imagined how much more significant the critical importance of this conversation would become. As we began to do the planning for this, which you can blame Linda, who just spoke as the chair-elect for EMO and a PSR alum, because she was the first one to reach out and say, let's do this. And then as we began to talk about it, I said, it is critical for us to have this conversation as faith communities, but we have to have it more broadly. And so I've been doing this, attempting to do this, to reach out to attorney generals across the United States to see if they would sit down and talk. And so I said, do you happen to know the Attorney General of Oregon? She's phenomenal. And lo and behold, to my surprise and thankfully, Attorney General Rosenblum agreed to come and be in conversation with us. So thank you for being here tonight and for the opportunity to do this together. My thanks to the Collins Lecture, to Concordia University, and especially to EMO for this opportunity to be here. I want to just say a couple of words about the context from which I speak, and then get our conversation through. Each of us will say a few words for about 20 minutes, so hang with us, and then we'll have an opportunity for question and answers. I come here from Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, California. It is one of the most diverse theological institutions in the country, everywhere from our student body, which is over 50% students of color, to our faculty, half of us are foreign-born, to our board. And this is a very intentional commitment to be this type of community. We are in the middle of the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, the largest theological consortium in the world, in Berkeley, California. Go figure. There are 8 seminaries across the theological spectrum of the Christian tradition and 11 centers that represent the major world religions. We are together on Holy Hill, as we call it affectionately. On Monday, we gather on Holy Hill with folks from across the street at Zaytuna College, the first accredited Muslim university in the country, with members of the Jewish Community Center, with members of our Jewish Center at the GTU and the Muslim community and Jain community, the Buddhist Center, to grieve together this last week. We gathered to remember, as has already been named, the tragic events on Saturday that gave voice and rise to the anti-Semitism that has shaped the mobility, migration, and expulsion of people throughout centuries. As the news of that tragedy reached me, the first image I had in my mind was of my grandmother. You can notice my last name is Vásquez-Levy. I'm a Guatemalan mutt. So I'm originally from Guatemala. Everything is hyphenated in my life. And my mom's side of the family is Jewish, so I grew up in a Jewish community going to Jewish school. My dad's side of the family was Lutheran, so I am both a Lutheran. But what I remember was my grandmother's words throughout my life, saying to us as she invested in our education with the resources she hardly had so that we would go to Jewish school, and would say to us, you can lose everything in a moment, but no one can take your education away. Those words at the time seemed like something a kid would go like, oh sure, that's what grandma say. But over my life, I realized the significance of the fragility of our lives. The Jewish tradition, as many of our religious traditions, focuses on a portable God. The great discovery, the wrestling of Jacob, was to realize a God who travels with us. That God is making God's way here in a group of people coming from across the United States, from Central America, and making their way here. They are walking thousands of miles, trying to escape violence and fear. What we do tonight is try to determine what's the story of what's happening, because stories matter. How we narrate, the stories we tell ourselves, how we frame our understanding. That's what theology is. It is making meaning and understanding the world. And we impose a certain understanding of the world. So as we gather, I want us to think about the fact that this ground we are on connects us directly to those who are pounding the pavement and the road as they make their way here. So what is it that's happening? Is this a threat to our national security that requires us to send as many troops as we currently have in Afghanistan to our border to militarize it? Is that the story? Is that the narrative? Or is there a different narrative we might be able to understand about what is happening? So that's our conversation tonight. My father was a lawyer. He wanted me to be one. He wanted every one of us to be one. Nobody did it. But if you've grown up in a household with a father who's a lawyer, you may have this experience. Whenever we had a disagreement about anything, my father would say, dura lex, sed lex. The law is harsh, but it's the law. In other words, my house, my rules. That is true, right? This is an axiom from the Roman law that tries to articulate the importance of law and order. It is really significant, and it's a way to understand the role of the law. Our current Attorney General for the United States, we have the fortune to have a different one here today, came to speak. Attorney General Sessions came to speak in California a couple of months ago. basically to give up his excuse for the reason he was separating families at the border from their children. And this is what he said: "I understand that we have a wide variety of political opinions out there on immigration, but the law in the book, it's in the books, and its purpose is clear." So his argument is the law is the law. It is harsh, but it's the law. We just have to obey it. And he went on to say, a refusal to apprehend and deport, those, especially the criminal element, effectively rejects all immigration law and creates an open borders system. Open borders is a radical, irrational idea that cannot be accepted. This is meaning making. This is storytelling, to be able to frame what is happening. So thus far we have the law is the law, and the alternative is chaotic, is irrational. It is something to be afraid of. Finally, he went to conclude his comments by saying, "It cannot be the policy of a great nation to up and reward those who unlawfully enter its country with legal status, social security, welfare, food stamps, and work permits. Meanwhile, those who engage in the process lawfully and patiently and wait their turn are discriminated against at every turn." This is storytelling, framing. And the framing is indicating the fact that the law is the law, the alternative is chaotic, and is not fair to everybody else who really needs protection, who is patiently waiting in line. It presumes there is a line in which you can wait in order to do this. And finally, our citizens, that's many of you, our citizens want our government to think about them for a change, to consider their interests. They have dreams too. This is storytelling, meaning-making, narratives. This is the work of religious communities, to make sense of the world, to make meaning of the world, and to be aware of the critique we must engage on those who have the power to tell stories. To be so cruel as to take the word dream and to turn it on its head. Not only is the law the law, the alternative is chaotic, and we are being taken advantage of, but we ought to care for us, because we have dreams too, meaning the dreams of others are a threat to ours. That is very clear storytelling. Now, we are a nation of immigrants. We have much to be proud of as the United States of America and the dreams we have built. But this narrative, this storytelling is not new to our nation. Our stories of migration are deeply complicated. Some of you may be familiar with this quote: "There is no such thing as a hyphenated American who is a good American. The only man who is a good American is the man who is an American and nothing else." Only one identity, no hyphens, no mutts. Everybody's going to be only one thing. And no women, of course. This was, I'm not sure how the men are going to come about without the women, but hey. This quote is from Theodore Roosevelt, delivered in 1915 at the Knights of Columbus in New York, on Columbus Day. Now we have other names for it. Now think about this for a moment. Again, this is storytelling, right? 1915, the Knights of Columbus in New York. Who do you think was there? A bunch of Italians, Italian Americans. But Theodore Roosevelt is arguing that we can only be one thing. That if you're standing on the corner and you hear somebody speaking in Spanish, they're monolingual, so they probably don't know English, right? Because the assumption is we can only be one thing. That is a narrative, a particular worldview. So we have within our story these narratives, the stories we tell ourselves. We need some new narratives, and we have places to find them. One narrative is reminding us that the law is harsh, but it is the law. Now, let's take some of our stories for a few minutes. Are you familiar, many of you probably, with the story of Genesis? Now, in the story of Genesis, there are laws, and there are also stories. One of the laws that makes its way into the Hebrew text is the fact that the firstborn is to receive the inheritance, right? You're probably familiar with the story, kind of shows up everywhere in the Bible. The reality is that it never happens. Think about Cain and Abel, the very first story. Cain and Abel was younger. For whatever reason, it was his offering that was accepted and not Cain, who was the older brother. That led to trouble, the killing of one brother to the other. This keeps happening. Right after that, we have Ishmael and Isaac, a story that captures much often the division within our communities. Ishmael was older, Isaac was younger. And so the story is trying to figure out a way in which the parents find a way for this division. There's a law, which is a law, and it's harsh. The firstborn should have the inheritance. But then there is people's realities, and it doesn't work that way. And the wrestling is to figure out a way for this to be resolved without them killing each other. It goes on, y'all. Jacob and Esau have the same thing. Jacob was born right after Esau, holding onto his heel, and then went on to receive the blessing. Esau sold it to him for a bowl of soup. And the reason, we are told, is because Jacob was probably the better leader. But again, the law says one thing, the story says something else, and it keeps going. Joseph is not the second born. Joseph is the 11th child, 12th actually, because there's a girl in the middle. But he's about the 11th boy, and he's the one who gets the privilege and the blessing. And it goes all the way till the end of the book of Genesis, where there's this fabulous image at the end. When Joseph has brought his father into Egypt, immigrant stories all over the place. And when the father goes to give the blessing, when Jacob is about to bless Joseph's children, he switches his hands so that his right hand is on the younger child and not on the older one. And he says, because the younger one will be a better leader. The law is the law, but sometimes it just doesn't fit reality. And the work of religion, we are told from the very Genesis, from the very beginning, is to navigate that distance between the harshness of the law and the reality of people. That's why stories are important. In the Christian tradition, as well as in many others, we know this. The story of Jacob is a wrestling in the night. That's where the name Israel comes, the one who wrestles with God in the night. And the wrestling is the space between the law and its expectation, its exigency, and the realities of people. In the Christian tradition, that law is negotiated in the person of Jesus Christ, who comes and pitches a tent among us, so that the individual story of somebody born as a refugee, as a homeless person, to a poor family out of wedlock, reconciles with the story with the law. St. Augustine had a little bit of a different nice axiom. I wish I had known when my father told me about the law and all that stuff. Lex injusta non est lex. An unjust law is no law at all. You may have heard this quoted elsewhere. You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws, writes Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. in his letter from Birmingham jail. This is certainly a legitimate concern. Again, remember what Attorney General Sessions is saying. Here's the law, the alternative is chaotic. And so this was argued in the 60s. And as he writes to a largely white audience of moderates who are telling him to kind of quiet it down a bit, he says, since we so diligently urged people to obey the Supreme Court's decision of 1954 outlawing segregation in the public schools, at first glance, it may seem rather paradoxical for us consciously to break laws. So he's acknowledging we have some tension here between the law and reality. One may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? Proposition 105 is trying to say this, right? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. And then he says, I would agree with Augustine. So, here's the law, here are the stories. How do we reconcile them? That is the work of religious communities. Not simply to blindly apply laws in the way that we have been told, and the way that slaves were told, when they tried to seek freedom and they were told, well, the Bible says you're supposed to obey your masters. We need new stories, a new interpretation. We need a way to be able to reconcile the two, and it is in our faith traditions and in our stories that we can find those powerful stories. We need the stories that tell us of Moses, who one of the participants in the Bible study I directed on the book of Exodus said, Moisés fue el primer mojado. Moses was the first wetback. He crossed the river against the law that separated his poverty and oppression from the opportunity he saw on the other side. We need the stories of Esther, who hid her identity, went by a different name. Her name was not Esther, it was Hadassah, but she was afraid. And at one point, like dreamers are doing across this country, came out for such a time as this. We need the stories of Ruth and Naomi, who made an allegiance with one another, to support one another in spite of the tensions between their two nations. These stories need to reframe our understanding of that group of people making their way here now. How do we understand what is happening? I want to encourage us to consider the possibility of one final story and how we interpret what's happening. As these images come through, I want you to remember, if you know the story, or let me tell you a bit about it, of another mutt, another hyphenated person, the Syrophoenician woman. This is a woman who came to Jesus in a text that's given preachers a lot of trouble. This woman was trying to get to Jesus, but there was an enforcement agency right in front of the disciples telling Jesus, send her away, but she kept insisting. She finally made it to Jesus, to the border. And she said to Jesus, I need help for my child. And Jesus responded something that is appalling. It is not right to take the children's food and give it to the dogs. Her response, though, was, yes, Lord, but even the dogs deserve the food, the crumbs that fall off the master's table. What I want us to encourage us to do is to reframe our understanding of what's happening with that caravan and with others as the mobility around the world is happening. That these are folks who are claiming that they deserve at least the crumbs off the global table we have set for ourselves. This, to me, is the largest civil disobedience movement in the world's history. It's the movement of people all around the world making that claim, demanding, by putting their bodies as people have before, not on counters, but across borders, walking, trying to demand a different way of being. Might we be inspired by their courage to take the risks it might take for us to be ultimately on the right side of history. Thank you.
Take my Constitution with me. Comes in handy, doesn't it? Yeah. Shall I send one to the president?
It is an honor to be here tonight with all of you. Thank you for this invitation. And thank you, Reverend Dr. Vásquez-Levy, for those inspiring remarks. It is a great way to begin this conversation. Some of you I saw at the vigil at Temple Beth Israel last Sunday. Reverend Hennessy, you were amazing. As sad as it was also community. So is tonight. And I'm glad to see friends again here and to have the chance to make some new ones, because we are all in this together. Let me say one thing at the outset that I hope frames all that is to follow. So many come to our country for refuge, for safety and security, from the dangers they face in the places they come from. It is simply not acceptable, it is not American, that today in our country, good people are being targeted, even murdered, because of their heritage and their faith. When I was asked to participate in this event, I did not quite understand what it was, and I knew I had another important event on this same night. However, when I read about Dr. Vásquez-Levy, I just thought to myself, wow, this is an invitation from Ecumenical Ministries. The wonderful Jan Elfers, the wonderful Dr. Page. And what an honor to be invited to speak on a dais with Dr. Vásquez-Levy. I must meet him and do this if I can. So forgive me for I was a little late tonight, but I was at the 20th anniversary of a program called Girl Scouts Beyond Bars that I helped get started 20 years ago. And that program brings girls together in a Girl Scout troop with their incarcerated moms and grandmas. And it was inspiring as well. My primary role, as I see it, as your Attorney General, is to look out for the most vulnerable Oregonians. So tonight is a very special one for me in terms of getting to do what I care about the most. On a personal note, as a granddaughter of immigrants driven out of their own country by intolerance and anti-Semitism, knowing some about why and what they went through to come here, and the universality that Dr. Jaramillo spoke about, the universality of that experience, helps inform my views and my role as we meet the legal challenges created by the current administration. It is in this context that I also find it abhorrent, as I am sure you do as well, that our country is greeting the caravan of refugees fleeing the dangers of unchecked corruption and gang violence in countries like Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador with the nose of a military rifle and an army, instead of welcoming them to our country and pursuing each one's legal claims for asylum with the attention that they deserve. In yesterday's Washington Post, I read the stories of two of the more than 2,000 children traveling as part of the caravan. One 12-year-old boy, Isaac, left his home in Honduras in the middle of the night. Another, Javier, told his mother he was going to soccer practice, and he never came back. Both tell of the hardships while traveling, including untreated illness and infection. Both miss their mothers and worry about them daily, but both believe that whatever possible hardships lie ahead in their quest to enter the United States will pale in comparison to the certainty of gang life and violence and death back home. Last week, I had the opportunity to give welcoming remarks to a fantastic program sponsored by Oregon women lawyers at the Mercy Corps headquarters. It was as if they knew I would be here tonight to discuss the legal side of migration and wanted to give me a preview. The program was entitled Journey to America, Access to Justice and the Oregon Refugee Experience. After hearing 3 powerful refugee stories, we heard from the voluntary agency refugee settlement staff, and then from a panel of legal providers, including Champon Sinlapse, herself a refugee from Laos, Lisa Lesage, the executive director of Immigration Counseling Services, and others who are devoting their careers to serving the legal needs of immigrants and refugees right here in our community. I want to especially note a fairly new law office called RISE, Refugee and Immigrant Services and Empowerment, spearheaded by a wonderful lawyer, Cheryl Kuhn. This program is one of a kind in the nation, right here in Portland, assisting the neediest refugees, including those with disabilities in particular. The way our Oregon legal community has put access to justice for immigrants and refugees high on its list of priorities makes me incredibly proud. So a special shout out and appreciation to those I have mentioned and to the many others who listen with patience and treat every client who comes to them with respect and compassion, with twin goals of fairness and justice. In moments such as this one, I look for inspiration. And one of my favorite sources is the eloquent Eleanor Roosevelt, who once said in prayer, "Keep us at tasks too hard for us, that we may be driven to thee for strength." I, for one, have doubled down over these past 18 months. Our team at the Oregon Department of Justice is working hard every day to fight and protect the liberties and the safety of all Oregonians. Before I get into the details of our work, a few additional facts should serve to enhance our discussion, and perhaps these have already been presented this afternoon, so I apologize if they have. Since 1967, more than 60,000 refugees have resettled here throughout our state. During these past 50 years, those refugees have become part of the rich fabric of our communities. We support and welcome them based on our commitment to international law and, quite simply, to humanity. It is also important to acknowledge that refugees bring a great deal to our state and nation in exchange for their own safety and freedom. It may surprise others, but not you, I'm sure, to learn that America's refugee population contributes billions of dollars each year to the nation's economy. In 2017, just to cite one example, a U.S. Department of Health and Human Services report found that refugees had brought in $63 billion more in government revenue over the past decade, 2005 to 2014, than they had expended. In today's environment, it is also worth noting that the draft report detailing this information had to be obtained and published by the New York Times because it was rejected by President Trump's administration and was not officially released. And that's because it contradicted the administration's decision to cut back drastically on the number of refugees allowed to enter our country each year. So let us not forget that beyond the humanitarian act of providing refuge to other human beings, accepting refugees has a net positive fiscal impact on all of us. The Trump administration has announced it will again lower the refugee cap next year to 30,000 from 45,000. And last year, the cap was already at its lowest level since the Refugee Act was passed in 1980. Given the needs of our world today and the capacity of our country, the cap should be at least 75,000. And I am sending a letter, along with many others, to our congressional delegation to that effect. And I have the language of it right here if anybody wants it. Okay? All right. In addition to the administration's other draconian immigration policies, this latest effort to reduce the number of refugees has disproportionately impacted Muslims, although there have been decreases in admissions across all religions. During the first 10 months of the fiscal year 2018, admissions for Muslims were dramatically reduced compared to the first 10 months of fiscal year 17, from 43% to 15% of the admitted refugees. Sadly, this is not a surprise. Right out of the gate, the administration began its relentless assault on immigrants and refugees. One short week after being sworn into office, the president issued an executive order banning immigrants and refugees from specifically Muslim-majority countries. And within weeks after that, we in the Oregon Department of Justice joined a Washington state lawsuit challenging that ban. And you will recall that in response to our legal work, the court in the Western District of Washington immediately issued a nationwide injunction and made specific findings of discrimination, violations of the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. That's in this book here. The administration was forced to regroup and issue a reluctantly watered-down version of the ban in what we called Travel Ban 2.0, and ultimately a further watered-down version of the Travel Ban 3.0 was upheld by a divided United States Supreme Court, essentially on the basis that the president has a lot of discretion when it comes to national security, and finding that his bigoted and specific statements about keeping Muslims out of the country made during the campaign should not be considered. Well, I disagree with the Supreme Court opinion, but it is currently the law of the land. Let me give you a little background about state attorneys general. We've kind of been in the news lately. State attorneys general work closely together, and they always have. That is because it is better to work together, to leverage resources when we have issues in common among our states, and harm to our constituents is occurring as a result. A fair amount of the time, we are able to act together in a bipartisan manner, such as on consumer protection issues like internet privacy and the opioid epidemic. But when it comes to issues of national concern, especially in these divided times, not everything can be done that way. So Democratic AGs, and there are currently 23 of us, tend to work most closely on the cases related to immigration and other federal law issues like the environment, healthcare, and student debt, for example. That's because we simply must stand up for the people of our states. So we cannot stand by while the federal government takes aim at our most basic freedoms repeatedly and without regard for the Constitution. They and we, all of us in positions of government authority, are sworn to uphold. So I call our program Progressive Federalism. And I actually have a Progressive Federalism Committee at my office now. And one of the members of that committee is a wonderful colleague of mine, Kamala Sugar, who's sitting right there. Thank you, Kamala. Before November 2016, I don't think any of us state attorneys general realized how much more important and serious our jobs would become. We thought they were pretty serious before, right? But it now seems we are the first and the last line of defense against the current administration. I know I'm not the only state attorney general who wakes up each morning and looks to see what new tweet will require us to take legal action, simply to protect the liberties and safety of our people and the sovereignty of our states. As co-chair of the Democratic Attorneys General Association, I help coordinate a weekly telephone call with all of my Democratic colleagues and their staff to develop strategy and to be sure we're working well together. And folks, this is about the rule of law and the Constitution. It's not about politics, even though we happen to be Democrats. Given the dizzying pace with which the policy shifts are taking place on almost every level, impacting our people and our environment in almost every conceivable fashion, this weekly call often seems inadequate to get the job done. Here are some examples of what we've done together. In March, the Secretary of Commerce directed the Census Bureau to include a question about citizenship on the 2020 census for the first time since 1950. For decades, the Census Bureau had taken the position, supported by research, that the question would depress census response, particularly from immigrant and hard-to-count communities. This really matters because the census is used not only for political redistricting and the assignment of new congressional seats, but it's also used to decide how to disperse federal aid and social services. If the once every 10-year count does not include a large segment of underserved communities, then medical, educational, and social services resources will not flow to that region or area, and communities that are already struggling will be even worse off. I was glad to be able to join with New York's Attorney General and many other Attorney General colleagues to file a suit challenging that action. We made claims both under the Constitution's enumeration clause, I bet you haven't read that one recently, but it's a really important one because it requires an accurate count of all of the people in the United States every 10 years. And under the Administrative Procedures Act, we brought this claim in addition to the Constitution. That, by the way, the APA, are there any lawyers in the room? Okay. If you're a lawyer, you know the APA was one of the most boring things we studied in law school. It is one of the most important acts. Read it, make sure you know it, because it turns out that just about all these lawsuits require us to sue under the Constitution and the APA, the Administrative Procedures Act. It's all about things like due process, rules, things you're supposed to do, follow rules in order to make changes, delaying the implementations of rules or adopting rules that have not been properly considered. So in fact, a federal court in New York has already found it likely that the administration acted in bad faith with respect to the census. So the court has allowed us to gather more discovery and records, and what we've turned up already is nothing short of outrageous. Believe it or not, we have a trial set for this coming Monday, November 5th in New York, so stay tuned. That's on the census question. A year ago in September 2017, there was the announcement that ripped at the heart of our immigrant communities, and that was when Attorney General Sessions said he would repeal DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, in 6 months. Because of DACA, more than 11,000 young dreamers have come forward and passed background checks and received permission to live, work, and go to school legally here in Oregon. In our country as a whole, the number exceeds 800,000 eligible DACAs. If this program ends, thousands of highly educated, motivated, tax-paying, contributing members of our society, not to mention our friends and our coworkers, would no longer have legal status. So we joined a lawsuit in the Eastern District of New York, and I'm pleased that injunctions were issued preventing the administration from putting an end to this important program. As if the sure, clap. As if the travel ban, the census question, and attack on DACA were not enough. As we all know, beginning this spring, the administration began separating thousands of children from their parents as they crossed the southwestern border of the United States under a so-called zero-tolerance policy. These separations included families seeking asylum from dangerous conditions in places such as El Salvador and Guatemala. Children were sent to states distant from their parents in a chaotic and a mismanaged effort, and they were sometimes held in the equivalent of cages. You've seen the footage of these horrible warehouses. We joined a lawsuit as a co-plaintiff in the Western District of Washington, and ultimately our case was transferred to the Southern District of California to be coordinated with a case filed by the ACLU. And that's because judges sometimes see fit to consolidate cases in order to have consistency in rulings and to achieve judicial efficiency. To show the harm this policy was causing Oregonians, we gathered declarations from several fathers separated from their children. These dads had been moved to Oregon's federal prison in Sheridan and housed alongside federal felons. To be clear, these immigration detainees are not convicted felons, but they are being held as such. The conditions they experienced both before coming to Oregon and after were unimaginable. Some were not connected with lawyers or medical care for weeks and were kept apart from their children and spouses for months. And some were members of our wonderful sick community. And I want to just say I'm sorry, and we will try to do something to make things better. I think that we have many lawyers and many social service workers on the ground now who are attempting to do that. But it should never have happened. It should never have happened. In addition, some children were held in Oregon, either in a foster care type of facility or in homes. As part of our investigation, we also learned of Oregon residents who had family members detained as they sought to enter the United States. So I've just described the 4 key immigration-related lawsuits that we have brought: the Muslim ban, DACA, the census, and child separation. But we don't only file lawsuits, we also file amicus briefs in support of other cases. We write, those are friend of the court briefs, where we're not a party, but where we feel that the legal issues are very important to take a position. We write letters to federal agencies or Congress, and we provide official comments during periods that are set aside for this purpose. We also look for opportunities to improve the law in Oregon and to explore ways we can better serve our communities here. And we work closely with our legislature in doing so. For example, in 2017, I supported the passage of House Bill 3464, now a law. That bill provided specifically for the privacy of certain information regarding immigrants, a very important law that I was very proud, even toward the end of the session, we were able to get through. One of the important aspects of that new law directs my office to issue model policies and guidance to state and local governments, including schools, to help them know what they can share and what they must not share if ICE comes knocking. That guidance is on our department website and easily accessible for your review. I also supported a bill related to police profiling. Back in 2016, the legislature asked me to chair a statewide task force on this important matter of concern. Our task force, including representatives from law enforcement, advocacy groups, and others, traveled across the state and held listening sessions on the impact of police profiling in many different communities. Ultimately, our task force members unanimously supported both the increased tracking of police stop data and universal law enforcement training on profiling here in Oregon. Preventing law enforcement profiling is now more important than ever in this time of increased ICE enforcement and the targeting of individuals based upon the color of their skin or the language that they speak. In addition, Oregon's longstanding sanctuary law is crucial to the protection of immigrants in our state. The law was passed by way of a bipartisan effort in 1987, intended to prevent racial profiling of immigrants and reduce state spending on immigration enforcement. 1987. Right. It was passed on a bipartisan. I don't think it was quite unanimous, but it was not controversial in 1987. In early 2017, Governor Brown issued an executive order to extend the key aspects of that sanctuary law to all state agencies. Especially in light of the events of last week, including multiple lethal incidents of hate-motivated crimes, I want to share with you that since last May, I have been convening a hate crimes task force. The mission of this task force, which is comprised of a very diverse group, is to determine if there are enhancements to Oregon's existing laws that would better protect individuals and groups who are targets of hate activity in Oregon. We will be holding listening sessions across the state. We have one scheduled in Medford for January, and we're working, of course, on Portland and probably Salem and Eugene as well before the session begins in late January, or maybe even mid-January. So we invite you to share your input and your experiences with us. Given the increase and the normalization of hateful rhetoric that we have been experiencing, it is essential that we take action to ensure our laws protecting against violent acts motivated by hate are as robust as they can be. So let me close my formal remarks this evening with this. I hope you can see that I firmly believe that justice and the rule of law are essential banners for fairness and equality, as well as shields against fear and oppression. I want to encourage you as faith leaders in our community to join me as I remain hopeful and to push back firmly against injustice when we see it. Together, in our different roles, I believe we can serve as the ethical and the moral compass for our state and our people. And in doing so, our values of compassion and respect for human dignity will prevail. I'm inspired by your passionate advocacy for immigrants and refugees. I know that it will take many coalitions and all of us working together with a mutual sense of moral obligation and clarity of purpose to defeat injustice and discrimination, especially when it comes from within the institutions of government. I consider myself a partner in this effort, and I hope we can continue to work together toward justice and fairness in the days and the months ahead. Thank you.
So just give us a second when I rearrange the stage a little so we can have some conversation. That's pretty heavy. Okay. Yes, so you'll want to. Here you go. All right, well, thank you all very much again for the opportunity to be with you. And we thought we would spend some time in conversation and kind of engage some questions. So please, if you have not done that so already, write your questions down. Pass them to the end. They'll sort through them and start bringing them to us. We've got a couple of questions to get us started that we thought we, seed the hopper with. So.
The first question is for you, Ellen.
Okay, sure.
Where is the role of the sanitary law, cities and states shifting, something that utilize federal issues?
Okay, so the question's about the role of the sanctuary laws in the cities and the states, and is it shifting something that really should be a federal issue? And I guess my feeling is, yes, it is a federal issue, and that's why we have sanctuary laws, because ICE and other federal immigration agencies need to do their job, and they seem to think that we should be helping them. That is what we are objecting to, basically, when it comes to sanctuary laws, is what we are saying is no, we are doing our job as state and local law enforcement, and you do your job as federal agents, but that does not require us to help you do that job, because we believe that our resources are best used the way we choose to use them, and we also believe that, in fact, sanctuary laws help our police and our other agencies that are involved in the justice system to do their job better. And that's because a lot of what we're talking about, and this is true with the courts, it is true with the entire justice system, it's true with so much in our society, it is about having trust and confidence in our justice system. And if you believe that you cannot report a crime to the police, if you believe that you cannot go to court and be a witness, or go to court and get a restraining order for fear that your local police are going to report you to ICE, then we're going to have a breakdown in our system, and our communities are going to be much less safe. So that's what sanctuary laws are really about. And that's why we have one 30 years ago that has served us well, and we also actually strengthened that law in our last legislative session by providing for these various specific aspects of privacy, of information to prevent ICE from being able to obtain information that they're not entitled to under our law.
I want to go ahead. God. So, you know, one way to think about what we're doing tonight is I've been thinking about this work as knitting the resistance. So those of you who are knitters, any of you knitting? You know, it takes a lot of activity to knit the resistance, to come together, because democracy depends heavily on that fabric that is knitted in gatherings around the table. The threats to democracy do not come from DC. The threats to democracy come from the breakdown in the local communities of our ability to knit our resistance. And so I think of sanctuary laws within cities as part of that task of interpreting law. I spoke about the role of religious communities in interpreting law, the laws, the sacred texts, and recognizing that they're not just simple black and white interpretations, you have just apply the law. It's about interpreting and engaging with it. So this is the practice of states to be able to do that, and you have a remarkable leader in Attorney General Rosenblum to be able to knit that resistance here in Oregon.
I'm going to take up knitting.
Okay, the second question. What do you tell those who say the sanctuary law supports robbery and crimes?
Okay, what do we tell those who say that sanctuary laws support harboring of criminals? We just tell them that there isn't anything in our sanctuary laws that prevent state and local law enforcement from investigating and prosecuting crimes. There's simply nothing there. That is one of those stories that is simply not false. And as a matter of fact, what I just said a few minutes ago is that I think we actually do a better job of protecting people and keeping crimes from being committed, domestic violence, sexual assault, other types of crimes. There's much less likelihood that crimes will be committed if people feel comfortable victims or potential victims feel comfortable going to the police.
Okay, for you. What can faith and communities do to support legal efforts to shift the narrative upward towards the immigration?
So how do we change the narrative? I tried to share some of that in the stories. I think the first thing I would recommend is read your sacred text. So my recommendation is read your Bible, read your Quran, read your Buddhist Tripitaka, read the Bhagavad Gita. I can't pronounce, sorry. Bhagavad Gita, there we go, sorry. We need to read our texts. We need to read our stories and find a way in which these stories will reshape our understanding of the world. These texts are about things that are big, ultimate, important. And even as our world changes significantly, these texts continue to speak to those important issues. So faith communities can encourage the ability to come around tables and knit the resistance. They can help us to understand a different way of interpreting the laws that we have, both within our sacred texts, but also as a nation. The reading of texts in our sacred traditions, to the extent that texts play a role in our traditions, in others the stories are not necessarily textual. Those stories help to inform the way we think differently about each other and our way of living in community. In a story, when Jesus is encountered by a Pharisee, the question that he asks is about who is my neighbor. The way this is introduced in the text is it says that he wanted to justify himself. So it's a caricature of Pharisees as being legalistic and narrow. We spend a lot of time and a lot of ink trying to answer that question. The immigration law in the United States is only rivaled in complexity by the tax law. We spend a lot of time trying to justify ourselves. So what we have in many of our sacred texts is challenges to those in authority. I think Jesus should have been asked a few questions. Anybody going around claiming to be the Son of God should be asked a few questions. So we need to both read our texts, come to know our traditions, but do so critically and also appreciatively. That will help us shift the narrative.
And if I could just add to that, so many of you here tonight have been so welcoming to those who are not necessarily in your same faith or religion. As an example, Wajdi Saeed, the Muslim Education Trust, has been so open and invited my staff to actually hold a hate crime symposium at the trust, and it brought people together who would never maybe have even known that it was there. It's such a beautiful space, and you're so welcoming. Reverend Knudsen, who's here somewhere, was earlier. His church, Augustana Lutheran Church, another example, and I don't mean to be, not calling out those of the rest of yours, but just two beautiful examples of how by breaking bread together and by your warmth and caring, I think we can change the narrative. We can begin to do that, and you already have. So thank you.
Okay, the fourth question. There is significant fear and concern amongst the immigration communities caused by constant change and exclusive orders and court decisions, not to mention the tweets. How do our community know what the law actually is?
That is such a great question. How do we know what the law is? Like I mentioned in my talk, we never know what new executive order is coming along, what the latest tweet will be. I mean, we saw the latest is to the threat to declare that, that those born in this country are not citizens necessarily. We need to be prepared. We know what the law is because the law is in this book. But the problem is that the law can be interpreted, of course, and actually that's a good thing because we would not expect, I'm not someone who believes necessarily in that when this was written is exactly how it should be interpreted. But as to this specific question, which I think goes to the travel ban issue, if I'm not mistaken, Samaya.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's confusing, and it's understandable, and it makes people fearful because so many things happen. But the travel ban cases are actually all decided now, and they're concluded. So I wish I could tell you that means that for those who are in the countries that were excluded by 3.0, remember we talked about the 3 different versions. 3.0 is the version that the non-unanimous, but still majority of the United States Supreme Court determined to uphold. So that is the current law of the land, and if there is anyone who is thinking, for example, of leaving the country, who is a member of any of those nationalities, I would strongly urge before leaving this country, because you might not get back in, that you consult with one of the wonderful legal service programs that we have, because I don't want there to be any mistake that it is possible that the law is not entirely clear on that point or on other points as to even those who may eventually be able to come into the country. We have not excluded it forever. But for the moment, I think we do know what the law is. And I, for one, because I believe it discriminates, am not pleased with it, but that's the way it is right now. The current law should not have any effect on anyone who's been naturalized as a U.S. citizen or otherwise lawful authority to be in the United States as an immigrant. But I do think it's completely understandable, your confusion, and I would urge you to follow up with me or with Kamala personally if you have any more questions about that.
Thank you. Okay, for you. Given the global reality of immigration, what values or challenges do you see in speaking about immigration in terms of an issue, civil rights?
So this is my argument, right? Can we think of the global mobility of people as the largest civil disobedience movement in the world's history? I mean, can we reframe and understand what's happening of global migration and what people are doing who have no choices, but who feel that it is unfair? That I shared earlier today that I became a U.S. citizen only about 2 years ago. After coming to the United States already in 1986, so it took me a long time. And part of the reason that I struggled to become a U.S. citizen became clear to me when I got my passport in the mail. I don't know if you've gotten a passport recently, but when you get the passport, it comes with a pamphlet. And the pamphlet reads, "With this passport, the world is yours." That's a particular narrative. And in that narrative, if I happen to have a U.S. passport, the world is my oyster. I can go anywhere. It's my right to do so. By contrast, many people around the world, and increasingly, particularly the poor, cannot move and take advantage of this globalization we are celebrating. That is simply unfair. So I think there is great possibility to draw on the legacy of our communities, to knit the resistance by disobeying laws, by challenging them. Now, I'm not calling for pandemonium, so don't get too nervous. But think about the fact that when the laws are unjust and unfair, how do we wrestle with them? Now, this is a tough tension. Attorney General Sessions argues that what we would have is just complete chaos and irrationality and no borders. So we have to find ways in which we are going to live within the law, but interpret it, challenge it, and change it. We have a legacy in this country in which we have sought to change the laws by challenging them in court, challenging them on the court institution, and sometimes challenging by putting our bodies across lines. So my hope in engaging these conversations, I get grateful for Attorney General Rosenblum for being willing to do this. I've had these conversations in a couple of other states, started out in Washington, but by Ferguson there. I think this is where the conversations need to happen. I like to be both challenged on this, thought about. I'm hoping to get the conversation going. Does this work? To think of it in these terms. What are the challenges, and how else might we think of how we narrate what's happening globally around mobility?
And if I could just add, I'm a strong believer that civil rights are human rights. And so I see absolutely that we must talk about what's going on in the immigration space as being about a civil rights movement.
We'll go ahead and read what we have, just as we shared with you. This is Kamala, thank you very much for helping with this. Is that, as we know, we can't answer all the questions, but we're certainly going to try to do some themes. So this question is directed to both of you. Here's the question. Is today's migration simply a primer for the migration we can expect due to climate change 25 years from now?
I think the answer is obvious in the room, right? I shared earlier today in a workshop, the book of Ruth in the Hebrew text begins with a real simple phrase. It says, in the time of the judges, there was a famine in the land. It's a pretty old text, and it sounds like a throwaway line until you realize that at the end of the book, right before Ruth, the book of Judges, to which it makes a reference, the judges were sort of leaders that were not quite elected, appointed. But the book of Judges in the Christian order of the books comes right before Ruth. And at the end of the book it says, in the time of the judges, so the same phrase, everyone did what they thought was right in their own eyes. So the reference to, in the time of the judges, there was a famine in the land, is that you have a pairing of political collapse or failure. The judges failed in their leadership role, combined with an environmental crisis. There's a famine in the land. The book of Ruth takes place in Bethlehem, the house of bread. There is a famine in the house of bread. All this to say, yes, this is the history of the world. The twin powers of political collapse and failure, combined with the failure to act around significant environmental changes, leads to deep dislocation of people. And so as we continue to pay no attention to what's happening globally around the environment, we are fueling a much greater movement of people. Because of that, the fear is rising and the conviction that we have to build walls to stop that mobility of people. So that's one way to approach it in a narrative. The wall of China did not work. It will not work to simply build walls. So we need to find much more creative, generative possibilities for the world, both to try to stop global warming and global climate change, but also to think about ways in which we deal with the consequences of both the globalization we've engaged in terms of trade and the changes that are happening globally in ways that are life-giving for all of us.
I wish I didn't have to take that question quite so seriously, but I do believe that it is an excellent question and there could very well be truth to it. And since I'm supposed to be the law side, I'm not going to be able to quote the Bible, but I will say this. We've already experienced in the last 18 months, in fact, we're involved in another lawsuit that I didn't talk about, involving those who did arrive because of acts of God, storms, hurricanes, the Haitian immigrants who came as a result of, I don't remember the year, but once they've been here on a temporary basis, our president has seen fit to send them back. Well, that is not an acceptable way for the laws to treat people who have come to this country under circumstances where, whether it's climate change or whether it's a particular storm that is related in some way to climate change, because I think we can now assume that just about everything that's happening out there is related in some way to climate change. Look at this, look at the flooding, look at the hurricanes that are coming earlier and stronger and lasting longer. So I think we have to assume that the law is going to need to keep up with what is happening in this space. And hopefully we will soon have a different administration that will take more seriously the science of what we know is happening out there in the world.
This next question is for Dr. Vásquez-Levy. Do you know of whether there are any specific congregations, temples, or mosques in Oregon or California that serve as a sanctuary congregation, and what risks do they take, if any, and do they make a difference?
I'll take the first part of it. I'm not from the area, so I know of I know for sure Augustana Lutheran, that was mentioned earlier. I just met St. Michael's, okay, and there are probably others. If you want to call out other congregations in the community, I'm sure there's a number of others.
I think there's quite a number of immigrant welcoming congregations, right?
What's interesting to think about briefly is what's happening around the sanctuary movement. In the 1980s, the sanctuary movement began in response to the displacement, very similar to what's happening right now, of people leaving out of Central America because of this, political crisis and civil wars that were taking place then. It's very similar to what's happening right now in terms of the movement of people trying to leave out of that kind of a circumstance. And so the sanctuary movement was created at that time, and many of you are familiar with it as creating a space within a church for people to take sanctuary in it. I'm going to venture briefly and let the Attorney General clarify what I mess up, but the United States actually does not have sanctuary laws, meaning there's no protection to a church to hide somebody. The government could go in, unlike parts of Europe, where the government would be actually prevented from entering the church. The only protections the church has would be the same that you would in any household, in which you have to, the authorities have to have an order to enter, but could do that. There's nothing that will protect you except public perception. So that's where our power as communities is that it's not going to look very good if they break into a church to try to get somebody out. And so the sanctuary movement began to work on that and to try to set some precedents to try to protect people who were about to be deported. Today's sanctuary movement, what is often called the new sanctuary movement, does not always involve the creation of spaces for people to live in a church while they're in hiding, but rather the creation of welcoming congregations in other ways. And so I think that I would encourage the community, and I'm sure EMO has ways to encourage communities that are interested in learning more about that role, about ways to do that, to create spaces. Again, think of this as knitting the resistance. So if we can set up pockets of this in our cities, in our states, in our churches, places where we live a vision we hope for that is different from the reality we're living with.
And I'm not going to correct anything that you've said, but I would say that we have, in the law, we do have sensitive spaces, sensitive places where even ICE is not supposed to go, not to say they don't, but I would like to, and I will continue to advocate for adding courthouses to the list of sensitive spaces. I do want to thank all of our wonderful churches and synagogues and all places of worship, mosques that have taken in folks who need that kind of protection, and we will continue to support you in that, despite the fact that I can't correct your statement about what the law provides exactly. Sanctuary is a word that really doesn't have a legal definition, although I embrace it because it feels good. That doesn't necessarily mean that the law has fully supported our idea. Those of us in this room, the people who live every day for love and caring, it's a little bit different from those of us who have to crack the books, the law books.
This is for Attorney General Rosenblum. Are faith-based civil disobedience actions, protesting unjust immigration laws, helpful or hurtful to your office's efforts to work legally for change?
Helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a softball.
We should recognize a couple of folks who are going to court tomorrow. We were supposed to have breakfast, but instead they're having to go to a deposition because they got arrested. So raise your hand so we can pray for you all. Go tomorrow.
This is for Dr. Vásquez-Levy, although I think either of you could answer. By what principles do you distinguish a just law from an unjust law? You knew that question was coming.
Yeah, and I think that this is the important part of it, right? This is not simple. And what I hope we can do is to challenge the simplistic way to engage it. It is not simplistic, right? It is difficult to figure out a way in which we acknowledge it, but you kind of know in some ways, and so you practice and you rehearse and you challenge in order to arrive at the definition of what may be just or unjust. One measure is it life-giving? Does it reflect our values? Does it, and our best interest? We create the laws. The way we, if you think about the way that the administration justified the separation of families at the border, was this honestly cowardly statement. Well, it's the law, I can't do anything about it. That's simply untrue, of course. So we can identify and challenge and say, does this law reflect the values we believe in? And then we go to court and wrestle it out, and then we protest and wrestle it out, and that's what we do. We've always done this. And so some laws have to be changed, and eventually that happens. In the meantime, there's a lot we can do within the existing situation to try to protect and reflect our values.
We have three branches of government. We have those who make the law, the legislature, right? We get to elect our legislators. We get to lobby our legislators. We hope that our legislators will pass just laws, right? We have the executive branch of government, myself included, our governor, our state agencies in the state, our federal agencies, that guy in Washington. I think some of us are able to do better at the work that we need to do to enforce the laws and make sure that we enforce those laws in a just manner. We also have the judiciary. And the judiciary ultimately, unless you just want to assume that the laws that were passed are bad laws, they could be good laws. But if we don't have a judiciary that is full of fairness and justice and integrity, if we have a politicized judiciary in this country, if we have a judiciary that doesn't have people on it who actually are humane individuals in addition to being smart and capable jurists, then we will not have just laws, no matter how great a job our legislators did in the first place.
We'll take two more. Okay, we have two more, and then there are some that are, just so you know, that are directed very specifically for specific things, and we are going to give those to you so that the persons who ask them can get an answer from you, and they've already given you the information. But this one is for the Attorney General. What is your position on the Abolish ICE movement? Abolish and replace, reconstitute, reform the agency? What is your position?
Phew, okay. So the first day that I heard about the movement to abolish ICE, I was asked what my opinion was about abolishing ICE, and I said, I'm not ready to abolish ICE. Okay, I don't really think that's going to solve the problem. I think that ICE is doing a really crappy job, okay? But that doesn't necessarily mean that because the EPA is doing a crappy job or because the Department of Education is doing a crappy job that I'm going to abolish the agencies. I would like to abolish the people running those agencies. I would like to abolish the people appointing the people who are running those agencies. And I would like to, I hate to say this because it would be a terrible note to close on, but I'd like to study the issue a little further.
I'll just comment on that. Some of you may remember INS, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and that got replaced by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. In that change, we went from civil-looking uniforms to military-looking uniforms. So ICE is an intentional change of the narrative that presumes it gets moved into the Department of Homeland Security. Now, INS had lots of problems, don't get me wrong, but it's interesting to note what narratives do as we begin to change the role of that agency. So whatever reform we do to that agency should consider the narrative that formed it, which is the conviction and the excuse of the attacks of 9/11 to create a sense that we are under attack by the world, and that that's our fear. As long as we maintain that as our foundational approach to the movement of people around us, it will lead to crappy enforcement.
Okay, this is your last question. I think you can both take a stab at it. It's a little bit of a long question, so bear with me. Part of reframing must include talking about U.S. complicity in causing upheaval in Central America. Also, U.S. multinational corporations pay wages in other countries that are unjust. I'm summarizing. What can the U.S. do to make things right? All right, I'm going to talk into I'll read it one more time. Part of reframing must include talking about U.S. complicity in causing upheaval in Central America. Also, U.S. multinationals pay wages that are unjust wages in Latin America and are subsistent wages. What can the U.S. do to make things right?
I'll start out. So, the NAFTA, which has just recently been revised, when NAFTA was passed around 1986, part of the agreement was, and the conviction was, that NAFTA would reduce migration. It wasn't really engaged very much, but the assumption was the rising tide raises all boats. The reality is, if you don't have a boat, a rising tide leads you to flooding and leads you to death. And it's terrible if those who are being flooded swim to the shore and then we throw them back. So what can we do? We need to recognize, yes, there is injustice in the way we practice our life in the world. The current disruption in Honduras was started by a coup the United States helped to orchestrate. It is also, as many of you know, influenced by the dumping of lots of people, literally dumping of lots of people out of a criminal system in the United States where they had been, hardened back into Central America, to places they'd never been in. And then the rerouting of the drug trades to Central America. So we are the big player in the scene. With that, with great privilege comes great responsibility. So there's no question in my mind that we have to engage on what it is that we are doing and what are more just ways to do, so that if we engage on free trade agreements, that we find honest ways to think about what implications that will have on migration and mobility. That if we are going to desire an economy that thrives on mobility of products, we need to allow those whose only product is their hands to participate in that economy. Those are difficult things to do. Earlier today, we talked about this in one of the workshops, and I'll just repeat one part of that. The people who have created this very complex economic system, which is remarkable what our economic system can do in terms of assembling pieces from everywhere in the world into our little phones and all kinds of things. The same brains can develop a much more complex, life-giving system for the mobility of people.
I'm kind of tempted to pass on the question because it's so complex and in some ways a kind of outside of my frame of reference as State Attorney General. But I will say this, that I think for starters, we need to really double down on eradicating hate from our communities and on immigration reform, on real immigration reform. I don't think that we can, I'm not disagreeing with anything that the questioner has suggested, but I don't think that we necessarily have to rely on a sense of guilt or a sense of complicity, but rather what we need to do is set that aside. It is what it is. It's not a good thing, but there's so much good that we can do now moving forward. And so I would rather view what we can do. I think the question was not what the state can do, but what the United States can do. We have a lot of work to do at the federal level, and I'm about the last person who can tell us how to get it done without a huge change in our political environment that currently exists.
Thank you. We are at a time, like I said, I know there were a couple of very personal questions that we will direct with you and people who want an answer with that. But a couple of things. I just want to reflect one thing that came to mind when we were talking about the implication. Jose Antonio Vargas is the founder of Define American. And I encourage you to go to the website. His one statement says, "We are here because you were there. We are here because you were there." And then we want to read this, and then I'm going to invite our closing prayer forward. But let me say this. This is what somebody wrote. Why not have a caravan of 7,000 or 70,000 walking from the U.S. side to greet the caravan of our neighbors from the South? What a pilgrimage that would be. Do you want to say something?
Just one final word, again, of appreciation, and I hope you might have a word of a conclusion as well. But I want to leave you with these words from Bartolo Fuentes. Bartolo Fuentes is a Honduran activist. A friend of mine just spoke with him yesterday. Bartolo has been accused of being the mastermind behind the caravan, as if, you know, this is all plotted. And so my friend asked him, "Are you afraid?" And he said, for his life, you know, because of being kind of targeted this way. He said, "Tengo miedo, pero no miedo paralizante." I am afraid, but it is not paralyzing fear. And then he went on to say, "A life not lived for others is no life at all."
Before we go to prayer, I just wanted to let you know and thank you very much for this wonderful, beautiful display. Where's Joe Snyder? Are you in the house, Joe? Thank you very much to the Quaker Reality community for providing this memorial, symbolic shoes of children. And they were very generous with us, and this is a symbolism of the children who in fact are impacted by this whole crisis of human migration. We thank you, Joe, and we thank you for we'll thank Tommy Carlisle. She's not here, but we will thank her in the air so that she can hear us, and if you would send our great gratitude. And with that, I want to thank Attorney General Rosenblum and Sumaya Elam and David Vásquez-Levy for being with us and gracing us to this evening. Thank you so very much. And now for our closing prayers, I'd like to invite our brother Wajdi Saeed for the Muslim Educational Trust and Rabbi Deborah Kolodny to bring the closing prayers.
Let's give a round of applause again to our great Attorney General and to Dr. Vásquez as well. And Sumaya did an excellent job. I want to acknowledge our young leaders here from the Oregon Islamic Academy. Can you wave your hands here in the second row? They are our future attorney generals as well as senators and congressmen and women. May God bless them. I will do two prayers, one of them in Arabic, the opening that we pray 17 times at least a day. And I will dedicate it to our President Trump. I pray for him every day, my 5 daily prayers, because each one of us need to pray. Rather than hating, rather we need to guide each one of us to the best. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Praise be to the Lord of the universe, who has created us for male and female and made us into nations and tribes, that we may know each other, not that we may despise each other. If the enemy incline towards peace, do thou incline towards peace, and trust God, the Almighty, the most merciful, the most compassionate. For the Lord is the one that hears and knows everything. And all the servants of God, most gracious, are those who walk in earth in humility. And when addressed to them, they say, peace be upon you. O God, the Almighty, O Allah, unite our hearts and set us aright our mutual affairs. Guide us in the path of peace and justice. Liberate us from darkness by your light. Save us to the enormous weather, open and hidden. Bless us, bless our ears and our hearts and our minds and our spouses and our children and our world. Turn us truly, you are the most returning, the most merciful. Make us grateful for your bounty and full of praise for it, so that we may get to know each other. O Allah, you have created us in different languages and different colors, so we can love one another. O Allah, impart to our earth its blessings, its embellishments, and its woes. O Allah, your forgiveness is vaster than our sins, and your compassion is more promising than our actions. O Allah, make us patient and grateful to you and to our brothers and sisters, whoever they are and what religion they are, and make us look small in our own eyes. O Allah, you are the most merciful and the most compassionate. Welcome us into your arms, the victims of violence and the hate, wherever they are. Comfort their families and all of us who grieve for them. Help us in our fear and uncertainties, and bless us with the knowledge that you are insecure in your love. O Allah, strengthen all those who work for justice, peace, and healing and unifying. Amen. O most merciful, most compassionate.
Amen.
Amen.
The Reverend Dr. David Vásquez-Levy taught us that we are to knit together the resistance. Martine Prechtel, a shaman, an author, and a teacher, teaches that we must grieve together to end generational trauma. We must grieve together to purge the urge for revenge. And I would add that we must grieve together to knit together communities of resilience, not just of resistance. So many have already mentioned the losses that we've experienced this past week, and I want to bring the names of those who were massacred last Shabbat in Pittsburgh into the space. I want to acknowledge the 10,000 known migrants who have died on their way to the United States since 1994, those who are seeking asylum. And I also want to remember the 2 African Americans who were gunned down in a Kroger while they were grocery shopping. We'll start with their names. Let us remember Maurice Stallard and Vicki Lee Jones. And let us remember from Pittsburgh, and then I will follow with, in Hebrew, the words from Psalm 23. Let us remember Joyce Feinberg, Richard Gottfried, Rose Mallinger, Jerry Rabinowitz, Cecil Rosenthal, David Rosenthal, Bernice Simon, Sylvan Simon, Daniel Stein, Melvin Wax, and Irving Younger. If you know this, please join me, and if not, just experience yourself immersed in the words that in English mean, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Gam ki elech begei, salma vet lo irara. Gam ki elech begei, salma vet lo irara. Lo, irara ki ata imadi. Lo, irara ki ata imadi. Like Wajdi, I would like to offer a second prayer for us as we move forward. While stories are necessary and finding new narratives are so essential, I just want to add that in Torah, the law too is on our side. More than any other commandment, more than any mitzvah in the Torah, we are commanded to welcome the immigrant, to honor and embrace the immigrant, treat them as our own, celebrate with them, feed them if that is what is needed, give them all the benefits that accrue to those of us who are citizens. So the law might be harsh in America, but the higher law is with us. So for all of us, for the lawyers and the theologians, I'm both, by the way. I feel so whole today listening to both of you. For the lawyers and the theologians, for the clergy who engaged in civil disobedience in order to free the asylum seekers from Sheridan. For as Rumi says, the wanderers, worshipers, lovers of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. From the words of Psalm 90, the English is, may the pleasantness of God be upon us and may the work of our hands be ensured. Adonai Eloheinu, Aleinu, Beinoam. Adonai Eloheinu, Aleinu, Umaseh Yadeinu, Konena Aleinu, Umaseh Yadeinu, Konene. And let us say together, Amen.